In this nugget, we are going to explore the key context of the poem Love's Philosophy by Percy Bysshe Shelley, and think about the writer's intentions. Shelley was born in 1792 and died in 1822. During his life, Shelley wrote several poems on the themes of love, morality, and political injustice. Morality are the principles about what is right and wrong, and injustice means a lack of fairness. Love's Philosophy is a love poem, but it also contains some of Shelley's views on morality. Shelley was a radical and had very radical views on love, morality, and desire. A radical is someone who wants extreme political or social change. Shelley did not believe in the institution of marriage, and only married his second wife, Mary Godwin, for practical reasons. In fact, he had children with Mary Godwin and travelled Europe with her without being married. Shelley believed that love and desire were natural and should not be constrained by society's rules. Constrained means restricted. This became one of the shared beliefs amongst other Romantic poets, such as Lord Byron and William Blake. He believed that love and desire were natural and should not be constrained by society's rules. Constrained means restricted. This became one of the shared beliefs amongst other Romantic poets, such as Lord Byron and William Blake. We see Shelley's radical views on love and desire in Love's Philosophy, where he argues that such emotions should be free as the elements in nature. In the poem, he shows natural pairings such as the waves clasping one another or the moonbeams kissing the sea. Shelley was part of the Romantic movement. This was a group of poets, artists, and writers who all wrote about the beauty and power of nature. Romantic poetry often includes descriptions of strong emotions and how nature can reflect these emotions. We have already discussed how some Romantic poets believed that love and desire were natural and should not be constrained or restricted by society's rules. Romantics often use imagery of freedom in nature to reflect their views on how human emotions should be free and unconstrained by society's strict rules and expectations. Here is an example of how Shelley believes that nature can reflect powerful human emotions. See the mountains kiss high heaven and the waves clasp one another. In these lines, Shelley seems to be suggesting that nature mirrors the beauty of natural physical intimacy in an attempt to explain his own desires to the female listener. Now, we're going to discuss the idea of the sublime. Romantic poets and painters believed that nature was the most sublime force, capable of inspiring the most powerful human emotions. Romantics also believed that there was a hidden power in nature that humans could never understand. Romantics believed that nature was sublime because it was almost too beautiful for people to express in words or art. Many Romantics challenged themselves to try and capture the beauty of nature in their art. Finally, they believed that God's beauty and power was also reflected in nature. We're going to look at some example sentences of how to use the word sublime. More specifically, here are some examples of how to use the word sublime to write about Love's Philosophy. It can be used either as an adjective or a noun. Like many of the Romantic poets, Shelley wished to explore the sublime power of nature. In this example, sublime is used as an adjective to describe the power of nature. In Love's Philosophy, Shelley evokes the sublime in nature to persuade his lover that there is something incredibly powerful yet beautiful about their desires for one another. In this example, sublime is used as a noun. So, to summarise, the most important things to remember about the sublime are that Romantics believed there was a hidden power or force within nature, and that the power and beauty of God was reflected in nature. Let's explore these points in a little more detail. Firstly, that there was a hidden power or force within nature. Much of the natural imagery in Love's philosophy focuses on the movement of water. The motion of rivers and the sea's tides are governed by powerful forces. Some examples include the quote, "The fountains mingle with the river, and the rivers with the ocean. The waves clasp one another, and the moonbeams kiss the sea." Shelley might be suggesting that there are ungovernable forces or uncontrollable forces in the world that draw us toward each other. Shelley might be suggesting that there are ungovernable or uncontrollable forces in the world that draw us towards each other, like the sea is drawn by the moon. We are powerless to resist and should embrace the invisible pulls that attract us to another person. We are powerless to resist and should embrace the invisible pulls that attract us to another person. Let's link some context about the sublime to the poem using the second point, that the power and beauty of God was reflected in nature. Shelley describes how the harmonious pairings in nature reflect God's desires for harmony and unity between humans. Shelley uses this idea to argue that it is God's divine law that two lovers should unite in physical harmony. A quotation to support this is, "All things by a law divine in one spirit meet and mingle. Why not I with thine?" Divine simply means godly or from God. Shelley's views on love, desire, and God contradicted society's expectations at the time he was writing. Shelley argues that both men and women should act on their desires freely. Despite Shelley arguing this, society would judge people, especially women, who had sexual relationships outside of marriage. In Love's philosophy, Shelley persuades his lover to give in to her desires freely. However, he does not think about or mention how this woman would be judged and outcast by society if she did listen to his arguments. However, he does not think about or mention how this woman would be judged and outcast by society if she did listen to his arguments. Let's link this point about context to a quotation from the poem. "No sister flower would be forgiven if it disdained its brother." In the 19th century, the only acceptable relationships between a man and a woman were those of marriage, where sex was sanctified by God, or family, for example, a brother and sister. Sanctified means to make pure or free from sin. Let's link this point about context and a quotation from the poem to some language analysis. Many of the speaker's arguments are dishonest. He describes how a sister flower would not disdain or reject her brother, making it seem as if all he is asking for is some harmless platonic show of love. However, this poem is about desire, so suggesting that he only requires the sort of love that a sister would show her brother is a lie, to make their love seem more socially acceptable. Arguably, this makes the speaker's behaviour quite manipulative. What do you think? Remember, whenever you include context or talk about the writer's intentions, try and link your ideas to a quotation from the poem. That way, you'll know you are making relevant contextual points. Now, we're going to look at an example of work which uses context and makes a relevant link. Which makes a relevant link to context, talks about writer's intentions, and uses quotations successfully. Many of the speaker's arguments are dishonest. He describes how a sister flower would not disdain or reject her brother, making it seem as if all he is asking for is some harmless, platonic show of love. However, this poem is about desire, so suggesting he only requires the sort of love a sister would show her brother is a lie, to make their love seem more socially acceptable. This is perhaps deceitful, as he is trying to persuade a woman to give in to her desires whilst ignoring how society would judge her for doing so. Now, we're going to identify the links to context, comments about writer's intention, and quotations used in this example. The candidate makes two clear links to context, talking about the social acceptability of desire at the time that Shelley was writing and the gender imbalance of society at the time. Next, we can see here a clear comment about the writer's intentions. Finally, the candidate uses quotations in the first part of his example to support his point. These are also clearly linked to context.